Okay. When I was little, I wanted to be a princess. Original, I know. As I've gotten older, though, I find I'm drawn more to the outcasts, the misunderstood tragic anti-heroes, and even the villains. The odd thing is, when I rewatch many of my favorite movies from when I was little, I can't help but notice something strange about these villains. The closer you look, the more you realize it's not just an evil plan or maniacal laugh they have in common, but often something in the way they talk, the way they dress, the way they walk. Many of the men act effeminate with a preening, extravagant way of moving and an obsession with their personal appearance, while the women are more masculine than the other female characters. But why? Why do so many bad guys act in this way? What makes them coded as villains? In other words, why are they queer-coded? Stick with me. Let's find out. First, we're going to look at queer coding and how it came to be common. Then we'll get into queer baiting and how it affects LGBT audiences today. And finally, we'll look ahead at the future of queer representation in movies. All right, queer bait, queer coding. What is it again? Queer coding is the subtextual portrayal of a queer character in the media whose identity is not explicitly confirmed within canon. Or in other words, a character with stereotypically gay attributes. Whether you notice it or not, you've been watching queer coding all your life because Hollywood used to love it, especially in its villains. Take Disney, which has been making movies since 1937. As you've probably noticed, kids watch these movies on repeat. And what's the secret to a good Disney movie? I mean, other than a beautiful princess and a dashing prince to save her? A scheming, wily, nefarious villain. You've got Scar from The Lion King, who slinks around the savannah, flouncing down onto crossed paws and singing in a sultry voice. And Jafar from Aladdin, who swishes around the palace in his huge red cloak with giant shoulder pads arching a pencil-darkened brow. Both of these characters have an effeminate way of talking and moving, especially when you compare them with their movie's more classically masculine heroes. And Ursula from The Little Mermaid's overdramatic personality, heavy makeup, and husky voice didn't come from nowhere. According to Disney animator Ruben Aquino, her character was based off of a real-life drag queen named Divine. So yes, these three characters and so many more have been queer-coded. For years, it was practically a Hollywood tradition. But if this is the first you're hearing about queer coding, you're not alone. Many people, especially straight people, have never had reason to notice. But do you know who did notice? Gay kids. What did it say to these kids when every time they saw someone who seemed like them, it was the bad guy? I'm wrong. I'm other. I'm broken. These queer-coded characters also reinforce what many straight adults already believed. They're wrong. They're other. They're broken. But how did queer coding get to be so common in the first place? Well, it all started in 1930 when Hollywood decided that it needed to censor its movies, afraid that the government would step in and do it if they didn't. They adopted something called the Motion Picture Production Code, or as it was more commonly known, the Hays Code, a set of moral guidelines designed to keep anything that people would find disgusting or offensive out of its films. The Code's 36 rules covered everything from violence to something referred to as sexual perversion. Sexual perversion, although never actually defined in the code, meant homosexuality, or really anything outside of the gender and sexual norms of the time. Pre-code in the 1920s, there had been some gay characters in movies, although they were heavily stereotyped, usually treated as a joke. It wasn't great. Under the code in the 1930s through 60s, though, characters were only gay in subtext. They pretty much never lived happily ever after, and definitely never got a partner. In fact, queer-coded characters were nearly always thieves, scoundrels, or straight-up murderers. Think of the effeminate and deceitful Joel Cairo from The Maltese Falcon with his gardenia-scented business cards, or the narcissistic, manipulative Brandon and weak Philip from Rope, who stand just a little too close to each other and are heading off for a weekend together in Vermont, and many more. Even after the code was phased out in the 1960s, many movie studios couldn't quite shake the habit of using queer coding. Think of the Disney movies I mentioned before, all of which were made more than 10 years later. And it's not just the villains. Newer movies have fewer queer-coded bad guys, but plenty of almost but not quite and partial representation that can cause some harm. You see, movie studios find themselves in a bit of a bind. They need people, lots of people in their theaters and eating overpriced popcorn. But how to accomplish this? On the one hand, there are LGBT people who want representation. But on the other hand, there are homophobic people who won't go to a movie and may even be quick to organize a boycott if even a little bit of gay is shown. The movie studios are all about profit, of course, so they need a way to make the most money while hopefully making both groups happy. Enter queer baiting. Queer baiting is where the creators of a story hint at but never actually confirm a same-sex relationship or other LGBT representation. The problem with this is that it is very subjective. So while some people might say that two characters' relationship is queer baiting, others won't. It's hard to pin down. In other more clear cases, a creator will say that a character is queer, but never show that in the actual story. Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling revealed, quote, "I always thought Dumbledore is gay. Dumbledore fell in love with Grindelwald. Don't forget, falling in love can blind us. He was very drawn to this brilliant person. This was Dumbledore's tragedy." When I first found this out, I was like, wait, what? Because this was never once mentioned in the books or the movies. Why wasn't it? This has happened time and time and again, with creators revealing in interviews that a character is LGBT, like Lando Calrissian, maybe even planning a scene to show it, like with Valkyrie from Marvel. But in the end, it all ends up on the cutting room floor. Instead of letting queer characters take center stage or including small LGBT moments as a natural part of the mix, many movie studios have started trying to appease the LGBT community by making a big deal out of very tiny, almost unnoticeable moments, like the lesbian kiss in Star Wars, or the brief few seconds where we see Sulu and his husband reunite in Star Trek Beyond. Now, these moments are definitely a sign of progress, don't get me wrong, and I, for one, am very happy about them. But when movie studios make such a big deal out of them, it only emphasizes how unusual and noteworthy they're still considered. Now, some of you might be wondering why this matters. You might be thinking, yeah, it sounds kind of annoying, but is it really a problem? No, I can't speak for everyone, of course. I can only provide my experience. But for me, it has been hard to so often see characters that I think are going to be together or be LGBT, and then almost always be wrong. It's frustrating that with two straight characters, it's always so easy to see as when they grow on screen that they're going to be together, but have to watch characters of the same gender with obvious chemistry dance around each other for the entire movie or show. It gets to the point where I doubt real representation and think I'm insane for seeing it. And I'm not the only one. As sociologist Emin Ghaznazi says, the reason this creates such outrage is because it takes away the humanity of LGBTQ+ people and reduces us into pawns in a game of profitability and politics. So yes, it is a different kind of harm, but harmful nonetheless. So, what next? Look, I think that we can all agree that we've got a long way to go with LGBT representation in movies, but a lot of people are working to try and achieve it, with large franchises like Marvel planning to include many more diverse characters in future movies, and prominent actors like Brie Larson advocating for more diversity in the films they work on. Gay rights organization GLAAD is calling for Hollywood to have LGBT characters in 20% of film releases by 2021, which we are close to achieving, and 50% by 2024. So what do we do while we wait for that percentage to go up? How about this? Just notice. The next time you watch your favorite classic movie, check out the villains. How do they look? How do they talk? How do they act? For any parents out there, talk to your kids about the stereotypes you spot in movies. Look for real representation. Are LGBT characters present? Are they portrayed as complex human beings? Because, of course, that's what they are. just like anyone else. Thank you.